We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that you really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side. That is the best environment to see gold increase its value.
Welcome to Palisade's Gold Radio. I'm your host, Tom Bodrovics. Joining me today is Dave Bradshaw, CPA, MBA, author, and business owner. Dave, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Tom. Pleasure to be here.
You know, it's always interesting when I have people, let's say, reach out to me. You heard a bit of my backstory on another podcast that I was on, and that kind of serves as really the basis for our discussion today. You have just released a book called No Second Chances, A Family Guide to the College Decision and the Lasting Impact of Debt. And really, I think this is an interesting intersection of all of the things that obviously that you and I are interested in, but also that is really important for families and people with and without wealth to consider to help their kids kind of come up in this world and really understand as well this skewed system of incentives that has perverted many of the markets, which we're going to talk about today, many of the markets in this country, really, right?
Yeah, I mean, the situation certainly changed from even when I was growing up, but definitely the boomers and Gen Xers, you know, college was this coming of age experience. It wasn't that expensive to go to. Food and housing wasn't that expensive. You could get through without a lot of debt. And the value of the degree was pretty decent from a return perspective. Mm-hmm. And most of the degrees people were getting had quite a bit of value out there in the world. And today, the situation's just changed. The cost has gone exponentially higher, much higher than inflation. The schools are, you can argue, and I don't think we'll need to talk too much about it today about what they're even teaching, but certainly the rigor of school has gone down by pretty much all accounts. And fewer and fewer students are actually graduating with degrees that serve them in the long term based on the amount of debt that they take out. Mm-hmm. And that debt is just overwhelming. I mean, they call it a crisis, right? I call it an epidemic. It's just awful. So I think it's a discussion that all the families need to be having about how much debt they're going to take out or how much family money they're going to invest in college that might be better off used elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And from your perspective, it's you went a different route and that's been successful for you, and not having that college debt. I think it's a very interesting discussion about how your life is different than maybe some of your friends' lives who didn't have that, who chose a different path.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly, you know, I did that calculus early on and understood the numbers from the perspective of somebody that was comparing, let's say, engineering to welding. I love building things. I love understanding how things work. And then at the end of the day, understanding, let's say, 4 years of no income coming in, and then adding on to that the debt of the cost of my education to be, let's just say, an average engineer. I don't know that I could have expected myself to be an extraordinary engineer. And that's, you know, just trying to be realistic and or humble versus being able to really challenge my first 2 years of education, being able to constantly have an income while doing my education in the real world and studying on my own time. That calculus is night and day different. And it was in my case. And this is a lot about what we're going to be talking about today is understanding that, you know, not necessarily attending college or university isn't a death sentence, and really understanding the actual situation as it is rather than the situation that you want it to be.
Yeah, the math speaks for itself, right? The math is undeniable. Mm-hmm. And the other part of the math is that we don't have price discovery going on with what these values of these degrees are. Since the government's in charge of giving out all the student loans, everyone gets a student loan. And strangely enough, they call it aid. Now, I don't know about you, but the last time somebody gave me some debt, whether it was on a car or a house or anything else, they certainly didn't describe it as aid. It's not aid. It's not helping you, with the exception of helping you to get a degree. And then the second part of that is you can't get rid of it. And unless a politician is going to buy your vote to try and get rid of it for you, it's not dischargeable in bankruptcy. That's the only financial decision you're going to make in your entire life that is not subject to bankruptcy, unless you decide not to pay your taxes. That's literally the only other one. And so if you don't do this calculation right, and you take what the universities will tell you, and you also don't realize that they're just running a business at this point. We like to think that these are our public institutions. A lot of them are land grant institutions, and they're doing the best for the students. But the tuition numbers show you that they're not. As we were discussing before we started, the Words and Numbers podcast, James does such a good job with the math. And a couple podcasts ago, when they were talking about is college worth it, he showed the numbers from 1985. And he said in 1985, a private institution cost $9,000 a year. He goes, if you inflation adjust that, it should be $27,000. So that should be the real cost of college today if the universities were just increasing costs with inflation. But instead, that average cost is $47,000. So it's 75% higher. So you can't say the institutions are working for the students, because if they were, they would be trying to make that number less, not more. Mm-hmm. And instead, it's so much more. The average now, if you want to go in Colorado, for tuition plus room and board at either the University of Colorado or Colorado State is $120,000. $120,000 is probably the second largest purchase anyone's going to make in their life besides a house. That's an insane amount of money.
And you're expected to make this decision with the help, obviously, of your parents or your peers at 17 or 18 years old, when, as I understand it, your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that's responsible for understanding future impacts of your decisions, isn't even really fully formed yet.
Well, absolutely, it's not. And not only that, you're making a decision that you really don't have a context for. If you ask college students how much money they think they're going to make when they get out of college, it's always a lot more than they're actually going to make. I had the same situation. I got out of college in 2001 with a master's degree and thought, oh, I'm going to make a lot of money this year. I made $40,000. You probably made more money. My roommate was a bartender. He made a lot more money than I did that year. I was not happy the first year I got out of college when reality set in of, oh, you have these bills. And luckily for me, I didn't have the student loan debt on top of that. But so many students do. And then you end up in this cycle where you go, oh, I have student loan debt, so I have to pay that bill, which means I can't afford all my other bills, which then means I'm going to end up on credit cards to pay for things. And okay, now I'm on credit cards paying for things. And then my financial spiral just keeps going out of control. Higher interest rates, more expense. And it's a spiral that a lot of people can't get out of. And it's why we have this, huge student loan crisis issue today. And all the students are begging the politicians to basically give them a free handout and say, sorry, you don't have to pay that back. But again, how fair is it that an 18-year-old made the decision? Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't have a problem with them fixing part of that, but you got to fix the original part of let's stop getting people in here. And this is what I'm really trying to do with this book is say, hey, families, look at this thoroughly. Answer some questions about what you're really after here. Get realistic about what your job prospects and what those pay after college is. And, based off of that, then come up with a plan. And instead, I think a lot of families are after the prestige of which school did you go to, right? Or after hey, it's the only way to make sure you stay in the middle class. And this is where I feel like your life experience is the perfect example of, this isn't the way you stay out of the middle class. In fact, going to college might be the way that you keep yourself out instead of get yourself in. Because like you said, the opportunity cost of not working, the actual cost of college that you entertain, and whether you're paying that and borrowing or your family's paying for that, is that family money that, could be set aside for you to, go buy your first house when you're out of college versus being in loads of debt and then that cascading your financial future.
So Dave, let's take a bit of a step back here and just understand, what prompted you to start writing this book and where did that inspiration come from?
Sure. Yeah. I had a family friend that wanted to be a veterinarian. And I remember my mother-in-law coming over one day and being like, oh yeah, she really, spent the last 2 years in high school working at a veterinarian's office and she just loves animals and she wants to be a veterinarian. And I, at the outset of that, you go, that's such a great profession to want to go into, right? You're not going into that because you want to get rich. You're going into that because you want to help animals and you want to help people with their animals. And when you get to fix an animal and send it home with its owner, that's just going to warm your heart. And I just have happened to have read an article about private equity buying up a lot of these veterinarian offices and making it worse for the veterinarians. And then I just went and took a little bit of a deep dive into, what's veterinarian? What are the requirements for that? And it turns out you need 8 years of school and then 2 years working in a veterinarian's office. And of course, the dream for the veterinarian is to eventually, hang their own shingle and run their own practice. Well, it turns out the average veterinarian has about $187,000 of student loan debt for a job that pays them roughly $100,000 a year, which is just again, when we talk about math, that math is so bad in terms of what that payment's going to be for so long. It just doesn't make any sense. And I took all this information kind of back to the family and was just, I don't know that you're aware of this, right? And then I also was very interested in what did the school tell you, right? And they happen to be here in Fort Collins, Colorado, at Colorado State University. And of course, the school said, oh yeah, we can help you finance with aid, everything that you need. And, you need to really do your undergrad here if you want to get into our veterinarian school. So you need to spend 8 years here and $250,000 to get that degree, right? Like it's just an obscene amount of money for what you're going to make afterwards. Not to mention 8 years of opportunity cost, of not making any money. So I just thought, this is just ridiculous. Have you guys thought this through? Have you looked at all this information? Because what I see is the hero's journey path for this girl being turned into essentially a worst nightmare. Like you want to go do this good thing for the world. And instead, you're going to be subject to the back end of these student loans for the rest of your life. And I don't know that you'll ever get them paid off. You might retire with them, much less have the entrepreneurial ability to save money and go open your own practice, because that's not cheap either, right? And I just saw this debt as just this huge burden. And it really got under my skin. And I thought, how many kids are going through this? And, you just pick up any newspaper on any day of the week and you can read about all these students with, $100,000 loans for a sociology degree. And you're just going, how is this possible? And then once you delve into the system of higher education, you go, oh, the government's involved. Now I understand.
Well, we'll get to that piece of it. But Dave, let's understand a little bit more about, let's say, how that cost would end up breaking down. How much is the actual education, quote unquote, worth? And then how much of that ends up being interest paid on that loan?
Well, the interest portion can add up huge, and especially depending on the type of loan you get. And so if the government's picking up the interest, it's not as bad. If the interest is compounding on you at the same time while you continue to go to school, and especially when you're doing these advanced degrees, and when you look at that, you go, well, that's not that short of a doctor to be a veterinarian, but the pay is probably less than half. And that math, that doesn't make any sense. And then if you look at the real breakdown of college, you go, well, about half of it's room and board. So if you look at the cost to go to the state schools, about half is room and board. And then the other half is tuition. So one of the things that I prescribe here to families, and I know it's not the go off and have the college experience you want, is if a family can just provide room and board, you're paying for half. already, right? That's half of school if you can just provide your student with room and board. Much less if you go to community college or something else. But once you start compounding the interest, then you put the pen to paper. And this is what I feel like a lot of students never even do until they're out of school, right? Because you're young, you don't really understand the consequence of what you're taking on. And then your loan's deferred. And 6 months after you get rid of college, if you get out of college, here comes the first bill. And then the wake-up call begins. Because I've wondered with these prices, I'm like, why aren't these students rioting on campus every day about these crazy costs of tuition? Mm-hmm. And you go, oh, well, because they don't see the bill until they're 6 months out of college. And then it's kind of hard to protest on campus when you're no longer on campus. But if I were these students, I would be protesting today about the cost.
But that's, I think, going back to the words and numbers guys, they do such a good job of highlighting a similar example to this, right? When you delay the actual realization or the cost of something, it becomes so abstract that you don't understand it until it's too late, right? In their case, I've heard them make the example of paying your taxes, let's say in cash, out of your complete paycheck. You would have a completely different understanding of cost and taxes and a completely different appreciation for how much of your paycheck ends up going to taxes versus, them just taking it off the top and you not really even noticing, right?
It's so true. And again, you're talking to 17 and 18-year-olds who are dealing with their peers, mostly arguing about who's getting into what school, right? Mm-hmm. It's mostly a contest for the rankings, which is its whole own hustle that, really means nothing. And, 10 years out of school, no one cares where you went to school. No one cares about what grades you got or that you graduated cum summa, any of that. No one cares. They just care, can you get the job done? I have a friend and she said that she did all of the things before college of like going and looking at the job, right? And she wanted to be a physical therapist. So she went and, saw what the job is in the physical therapist's office. And she talked about all of that. She goes, but the one thing no one ever talked about was money. So if you would put them in that job and go, okay, here's your job after college, and here's how much money you're going to make. And then if you make this decision based on your student loans, here's how much we're going to take from you. I think people would make a very different decision. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the math that I'm showing them to go, do this math first, right? And go be realistic. What job do you really want? And do you even know the qualifications? Mm-hmm. And what we often find out is that people don't even understand the real qualifications for the job. Like if you want to be a CPA, you could be in high school and think, oh, yeah, CPA, that seems like a nice stable job. And they get to go audit companies and help people with taxes. Okay, what does that require? Well, you need 150 college credit hours just to sit to take the exam. That's essentially a master's degree. Mm-hmm. So the get out of college, get a CPA job means you need a master's degree. And oh yeah, by the way, those first few years out of college, not going to pay so well. Mm-hmm. So I don't think anyone really wants to do the math because then they have to face this reality check. And for the better off families in America who can afford to pay for their kids to go to college, they're just paying it because they're so worried that their kids are going to drop, from a middle class to lower middle class if they don't go to college. So they just go, we'll just pay and hope and pray that the education they get pays itself off. And, kids are going to study whatever they're going to study. But I think if they did the backwards of let me go get the job, let me look at the job, let me see how much money they're going to take out of my check and for how many years. I mean, how do you conceptualize to an 18-year-old, you're going to make student loan payments for 10 or 20 or 30 years? They've only been alive for 18 and they've only, they just went through puberty like 6 ago. So how can they relate 30 years when they've only really lived like 6 years of, we'll even call it adulthood, and it's not even that yet.
And they haven't even really started to deal with their own finances basically at that point either.
Likely not at all. Mm-hmm. Especially today's kids work less and less. So mom and dad have done all of that. And you see this a lot with first year college, the first in their family to go to college. And the family's just so proud that they have a student that is educationally capable, right, to go. that it's whatever the cost is, we're willing to bear it to have a college graduate, to have a diploma on the family name, not realizing, well, what am I going to go do with that afterwards? And what specifically is this degree going to do it? And, I'm all for a liberal arts education of just go learn how to ask questions, right? That sounds great. But when you take the idea that Harvard, whose logo is Veritas, which means truth, but yet they have the lowest score for freedom of speech on campus, how are you ever getting to the truth? So you're not getting the liberal arts education in the context of like, you're going to learn how to ask questions and figure out where the truth is derived in there at these schools anymore. And so that's just another value proposition. And then the other thing that James and Ant talk about on Words and Numbers all the time is the quality of the education and the standards to which they're teaching to. And those standards have come down. And I know this I have friends that teach first-year accounting students that just came out of college for big firms. And they say they can no longer use the syllabus they used 15 years ago. The students all say, this is too hard. So the cost goes up, the quality comes down. And as an employer, well, if I'm not getting a better student, I'm certainly not going to pay them more. But now they have a bigger student loan debt problem. And this cycle is just insane at this point where you go, I don't know how they're going to ever fix this without, getting rid of the Department of Education and stopping it and getting price discovery. But of course, that blows up the university model. And, how are they going to do that? Mm-hmm. So the only hope to me is that students and families individually say, hey, we're going to stop. It's our personal decision to not take out this debt. It's our personal decision to find another route, whether that's through the trades, whether that's through community college. One of the stories I relate in the book is a friend of mine, kid wanted to go to engineering school in Boulder at the University of Colorado. And he's a smart kid, right? And he goes to the University of Colorado and goes through the tour. And they tell him, oh, you'd be a great fit here, and this is what you need to do. And if you want to get in engineering school, you really need to be at CU all 4 years. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, they never ask about the family situation. They never ask about family finances because, of course, they can provide you with all the aid that you need. And by aid, we mean debt that you can never get rid of, which is ludicrous. Mm-hmm. But there is a community college route that is half the price, where the kids could have stayed at home, paid half the price of tuition. And it is a literal handoff transfer program designed by the University of Colorado for kids to go to community college for the first 2 years. So the family can save half. And this is what I mean when you go to the universities and you talk to them. And these aren't bad people, right? They're just doing their job too, selling what they had to sell. But most people don't realize that's what they're doing. They're selling to you. And once you're on campus, you're just another number. And then they want to keep you there, which is why the standards have dropped. And they're not looking after your family finances. They're not telling you what is the lowest cost, best value route for you to go get a degree. If you and your family aren't doing that on your own, you get taken advantage of. And then you have all these student loans for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm. Dave, this kind of brings up this idea of the lack of really free market price discovery within the education system. Obviously there are certain degrees, certain disciplines where you do need a formal education like this. Let's just use the placeholder of STEM degrees, needing that type of education for. But, there are even ways around that. But the point that I want to kind of nail down here is this idea that with the government regulation or subsidization of this loan industry, how has this completely distorted and really, from an incentive perspective, perverted this system and this pricing system?
You hit the nail on the head right there, Tom. I mean, the government getting involved eliminates price discovery. So if, for example, right now we had price discovery in the market, there would be almost an infinite amount of loans available for nurses because we need nurses. We have an aging boomer population where medical services are in high demand. If you get a nursing degree right now, Not only does it only take you anywhere from 2 to 4 years to get that degree, but you get a job immediately. That's a good paying job. The value proposition there is very high. Like that's one of those degrees where people go, I want to be a nurse. I'm going to go get this degree. You say, I still want you to, try and keep your costs down from a don't borrow what you don't need to borrow perspective. But you're going to have a degree to loan ratio there that makes a lot of sense, that you can pay that loan back pretty quickly without too much pain. Versus the other side of that, of the veterinarian, where it makes no sense. And of course, when the government gets involved, all the markets get distorted. But the government got involved here in two really bad ways. First, we're going to create laws that basically benefit the bankers to go, you can't discharge these loans in bankruptcy, right? Second of all, then they come back and they go, oh, well, we want the government to be in charge of all the loans. Well, the government in charge of all the loans means everybody gets a loan, regardless of your real capability, right? So one of the exercises that I go through in the book for families is you need to have a realistic expectation of like where you are academically, and then a realistic expectation of like who you are and what you really want to do. So those things, because I could never be a nurse. I see needles, I turn white. I literally, man, like when I get blood drawn, I have to turn the other way and think about something else because that's going to make me go white. So I can't be a nurse, right? So I got to do something else. But we need these technical professionals. You're absolutely right. There's no way you could, I won't say no way, you could become a CPA working on your own, educating yourself, but it's going to be pretty hard, right? It's a lot of classes. It's a lot of different things you need to know about. A formal education makes pretty good sense for those things, right? But again, that value proposition, the reason there's no CPAs right now is because the wages don't justify the cost of college. And so,
which again comes back to that initial distortion of interference in those markets, which distorts the price discovery of what the value of that actual person or that degree ends up being worth, and what the cost is that they are being compensated by.
Yeah. And I think if you had the private market come back in and we're looking at this, they would look at, okay, what degree are you trying to go get? Where are you academically? I mean, it would be no different than anything else you're trying to do with credit, right? If you're trying to do anything else in your life with credit, you want to buy a house, right? Okay. How much a down payment can you put down? What kind of job do you have to pay that mortgage, right? What are what's your credit score? What's your history of repayment, right? You want to buy a house, a car, anything else. They're going to come look at you holistically. Like, what are your prospects? And, what do you bring into the table? Only in student loans do they just go, you have a pulse? You got in? And of course, when we say you got in, right, we're not talking about everyone's going to Ivy League schools and, high ranking schools. There's all the way down the list of schools that are, second and third tier schools, which is great for people who need to go there, but not great if we're just giving them infinite amount of money to get degrees that the world doesn't find valuable. And then how many sociology majors do we need? It's interesting, sure, but you can read Socrates on your own, and like I said, I'm all for the liberal arts degree if we're teaching people how to think and solve problems.
Not what to think.
Not what to think. Yeah, exactly. And there's a whole lot of the what to think out there. And that again is what's this value proposition? And without the free market saying, what is the value proposition? What do we need? And what do we value out of what schools? And because you certainly see this from a hiring perspective, right? Certain companies hire out of different schools because the rigor in those programs has shown that those graduates are very capable of doing the job. If you go to the University of Colorado and get an engineering degree and you do decently well at that school, you're pretty likely to get a job, right? And again, then what's the value proposition of that? Well, that depends. Did you pay out-of-state tuition to go to school? That value proposition goes terrible, which is like the worst value proposition of all. Out-of-state tuition is like burning money. I mean, it just makes no sense whatsoever, especially when you can get around it by like move there and work for a year. Save yourself $150,000. Like if you go to UCLA out of state, you will spend $160,000 just on out-of-state tuition. That's just the out-of-state part, right? And then another $150,000 for the rest of it. $300,000 is an insane amount for a piece of paper. that may or may not be useful. Then we haven't even talked about what degree that is. That's just, the rate, but it's a prestigious school. So people just assume, and then there's the other side of that, where if you can get into the Ivy League, go do it. Right. Like pretty much almost regardless of what degree you get out of there, the people you meet, the contacts you get, if you're really that smart, go do that. But if you really
have those connections.
Right. Well, and then there's that, there's a reason Harvard has the most sports teams out of everybody. You got to get your legacy admissions in.
So Dave, one of the things that I really appreciate and liked about this book is that on one hand, it's very educational. It's very pragmatic. And then on the other hand, it's almost like a workbook. You have places where people can fill out answers to questions that help frame the idea and the purpose of actually going to some type of post-secondary education. So why don't we touch on a little bit about how you guide young people to kind of define their purpose in life, which I think helps them to really crystallize their interests and skill sets.
I appreciate that, Tom. I'm glad that those resonated with you as well. The design of this was, I don't have answers for people. Often, especially in finance, people want an answer. Well, what do I do? I said, well, I don't know, because I don't know you specifically. I don't know what you want. So what I wanted to do was ask people the questions. Why do you want to go to college? What do you want to learn about? What are you interested in? What job do you think that you want? So asking people the questions so they could fill it out and kind of contemplate those answers. And then also play the back and forth for the parents too. What do the parents want? Like for the parents, sometimes it's just about they really want the prestige of, a lot of parents, and I'm a West Coast kid, so I don't say this disparagingly about East Coast parents, but East Coast parents care a lot more about the where you went to school part. Like they like to brag about, oh, my kid got into Dartmouth or whatever school they got into. And so you've got the parents going, well, what do the parents want? And then you have the kids, what do the kids want? And so, one of the recommendations I make in here is, hey, as you go through this together the first time, parents, write your answers separately than your kids, like do it separate, and then come back and talk together and go, are we on the same page here, or do we see things differently? And go through, who you are as a student, who you are as a person, what sort of college experience you're looking for, and answer kind of all the questions around this college decision to then come up with, and then have a realistic expectation of the math and the numbers, and say, okay, well, I would like this job. It pays X amount of money. I can borrow up to this amount, and I feel okay paying that. And then come up with a holistic plan that goes, how much family money do we have to offer? How much in debt do we really want to take out? What degree do I really want to get? And one of the things I always try and focus students on is forget about all these minors. You talk to a college kid and they will tell you they've got 2 majors and 3 minors. And my advice is always just get one degree, just get it done, right? Because what all of the studies show is 10 years out of school, and being an entrepreneur myself and hiring people, I don't care where you went to school. I don't care what your minors are. I care that you can get the job done and that you know how to work with people and solve problems. Like this is at the end of the day what you're trying to do. But really, I did try and set up as a workbook for people to work through, ask questions, and then sort of educate them on the business of higher education, because that's what it's become now. It's a business, and it's a very distorted business because there's no price discovery, as we already discussed.
Mm-hmm. I think another aspect of this, and it's, let's say, one of the aspects that I wouldn't have considered about having this debt load is this mental load that you end up having because of this debt. And also the other kind of piece to this that I think fits in here that is worth discussing is this financial nihilism that young people have when looking at this educational proposition for them.
Yeah, both very good points. And that's exactly what happens. And I can't tell you how many, it's weird. Once you start getting deeply involved in this and going really far down the rabbit hole, then you just start seeing the stories everywhere, right? It's like when you don't travel, you don't notice hotels. When you start traveling, you not only notice the hotels, but you're like, oh, there's like 6 right here. They're like a wolf pack. There's never just one, right? And so you start seeing all of these stories and reading more and more of these stories and the impact that debt has on people. And I would say the first psychological impact, and I asked this question in the book, and I phrase it as like an ACT question of like, hey, does stress cause disease? And of course, the answer to that is yes. And then you go, well, does debt cause stress? Well, then yes. Okay, then debt causes disease, right? I mean, it's a pretty simple correlation. And you see that with people over and over. I mean, I have a younger brother who is in the dating world in his 20s, and college debt is now like a second date discussion question of like, how much do you have? Not like, oh, do you have? So when 20 years ago for me, that was, do you have any? And then what was that number? And if that number was like over 20, it was like, whoa, what'd you do? Are you a doctor? Nowadays it's like 20 is low, 40 is kind of average, right? And 100 is not unheard of, right? And you go, oh, I really like you, but you have 100 grand of student loan debt and you make 50 grand a year. I don't think we can date, right? Like I psychologically, I can't even understand like how impactful that is. Like what does that do to you psychologically? And then to your second point about financial nihilism, I think this is really where financial nihilism kind of got brought out. You could argue that it's also, cost of housing, which right now is ridiculous, especially with interest rates where they are. But when you don't have the ability to save because you have these huge student loan debt payments, and not only that, but the reality is if you look at the whole education system, it's telling everyone to go to college, right? There was a grade school right down the street from a house in Denver, and it said, future college graduates studying here. This is at a grade school. And I'm going, so you're indoctrinating these kids that everyone should go to college. And the truth is only 1 out of 3 kids that start high school will graduate from college. So the system's set up for those 1/3, but it's telling everybody that's where you need to go. And then you go do what they tell you to do. In doing so, you take out a bunch of debt. Now you're stuck. I would be super pissed too. I'd be like, wait a minute. I did everything you guys told me what to do. Now I have all this debt, which is causing all of this stress and pressure on me. There's no way I get rid of it except for somebody buying political votes. I can't necessarily just, up job skills easily and get these great paying jobs that you kind of promised us of everyone goes to college, everyone gets great jobs. I would be a little bit nihilistic myself, right? And then you pile onto that, oh, the price of everything just went up 30% in 3 years, and housing's unaffordable, and cars are, ridiculously expensive to what they should be. And you go, well, yeah, how do we get ours? The boomers seem to have most of it. I think you're a Gen Xer like me, and we're kind of stuck in the middle of like, we're not awful, but we're not as good as the boomers are. And then we look behind us and we go, yeah, I'd be pissed at the boomers too. We're all pissed at the boomers as well. They don't know that. They think we're part of them, but we're not.
I'm
we're
even
waiting
worse.
for all of them to get out of office.
I'm even worse, Dave. I'm a millennial.
You're a millennial?
Yeah.
You must be on the cusp.
86.
86? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I'm 4 years in, I think, is the technical.
The technical cutoff, 80-ish. Yeah, probably so. Yeah, I mean, if you had gone to college and got 100 grand of student loan debt, right, and you were still burdened by that, you'd be pretty pissed off right now. I mean, so from your perspective, I'm sure you have friends that went the other route, have the student loan debt. How has that affected your life versus not doing that, and going and doing welding and learning how to go?
Honestly, Dave, I have a hard time thinking of an example of somebody that I know that has student debt at this point. But obviously, I have a circle of let's say very odd peers. So I can't give you a perfect example from my life in a way that I can understand that properly. But I wanted to go back to something just to touch on real quick, and then we'll return to this. You were saying that only, let's say, a third of the kids that, let's say, graduate high school end up graduating from a college. The one number that I want to understand as well is what is the number of those that graduate end up defaulting on their loan payments?
So it's hard to nail down that exact number. And especially, obviously, the last few years, they deferred everyone's payments for forever, so who's in default, who's not. But prior to COVID stuff, it was 1 million students per year were defaulting. Now, it's always hard, again, you're dealing with government data to go, well, is it the same person that defaulted last year, defaulting this year? I don't know.
Right.
What I do know is the numbers are staggering for the people that do default. There's so many people that end up in situations where they, imagine we have a recession, which is why they gave everyone student loan payments for free during COVID, and people lose their jobs and they're basically living paycheck to paycheck because they have so much debt, right? And but it's hard to actually figure out what that real number is. Mm-hmm. But there's the other numbers of all the in-between students, and these are really the people that I hope get a hold of this and information and ask these questions. And that's the people that start college and don't even finish and still have student loan debt. So you're basically going to get zero of the benefits and still have a bunch of debt. But yeah, the entire education system to me is broken in the sense that it's now set up for the 1/3 of kids going to college. Like, I don't know anyone going to high school who feels like they're not going to go to college and the education system is serving them. Whether it's, they've cut out more and more of the shop classes and we're going to send people on a different path, right? Meanwhile, there's a shortage of construction workers. There's a shortage of people who actually have technical skills to go do real things in the world for things that we need done, whether it's building homes or bridges or doing, moving things around, right? Instead, they have no skills, and we go, great, you can work in an Amazon warehouse because you can walk, right? Like this is the skill set requirement. And I think it's just a disservice to most of the kids. And then those who do go to college, we're saddling with debt. So to me, this whole system is just broken, and fixing it's way above my pay grade. So my focus has just been on, hey, how can I help a few people not get in this debt trap that then doesn't serve them for the rest of their life, and then they can't get out of. Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to that example that you were trying to get me to elucidate for you. I don't have a good example of that, unfortunately, but you must have one where you have personal experience with somebody that is still saddled by this much debt. And maybe that is partially due to the difference between, let's say, Canada and the US system.
Very possible. Yeah. But yeah, I have people across the spectrum. People who, had family help who didn't end up with student loan debt. I know people with a lot of student loan debt that it is a massive burden for them, like way more than they should have got. I know lawyers in their 50s that are still paying off their student loan debt. And it's not a small number, because they told everybody come to law school, and then all of a sudden we ended up with way too many lawyers and the value of a lawyer went down. So I think the examples that everyone likes to give is if you get to work for some of these elite professional service firms that pay a lot. Now, they also don't tell you that you'll have no life and work 80, 90 hours a week. But those people do okay. Everybody else in the middle really struggles. I have another friend, the physical therapist. Well, she had so much student loan debt and realized her physical therapy job was not going to allow her to pay that off. It was going to take like 25 years. Mm-hmm. So she went and got a realtor's license and started, side hustle as a realtor so she could get rid of her student loan debt. And it still took her 14 years from the time she graduated from college to get rid of her student loan debt. And the other part that I see a lot out in the entrepreneurial community is people who would want to go start their own firms, who would want to do their own thing, but they can't. And they can't because they have this burden of student loan debt. And that's another part that really got me kind of motivated to get this book finished was we need more entrepreneurs, not less. And what I'm seeing is the entrepreneurial route. And again, you want to start a business, you need to be able to save money. Well, how do you save money when you're in debt and trying to get out of debt? You don't. Like that's, it's an old joke, right? Like getting to zero is like a grand accomplishment, right? Because even for most young people, right, you're not going to make enough when you're young for the lifestyle you want to live. So you're going to put a little bit on credit cards and a little bit can grow a little bit. And if you're lucky, like I think almost everybody remembers the day they got to zero. Like, I'm out of debt. And it's like a woohoo moment, right? Well, if that's not until your 40s and 50s, which for a lot of my siblings, that's been the case. Like they're just getting out of their student loan debts in their 40s and 50s. And that's before the price of school went way up. Mm-hmm. So this goes back to what you were talking about, that financial nihilism. If you look at what you're making and what you're spending, and you're trying to see that path out, it gets real cloudy really quick. And you just go, well, if I don't see the way out, then who cares? And then we end up with the, let's go gamble in crypto coins and shit coins and, do whatever we can to try and hit a lottery ticket because that's really the way out. And I think that's a major cause of it is just having all this debt.
Again, driving everybody up that risk curve because of,
because they did what they told them to do. This is the worst part about it. Mm-hmm. It's they did what they told them to do. That's the part that really infuriates me. It's like I don't blame the kids so much because again, like you said, they have an undeveloped brain, right? And they're being offered all of this debt that they don't really understand the consequences of. They don't have the life experience to know, wait a minute, this is the only financial decision I'm going to make in my life where it's going to follow me for forever. Like I can't go BK this, like as an entrepreneur, you're supposed to fail. In fact, if you never failed as an entrepreneur, I'd say you're probably not a very good one because like something needs to fail because the lessons, like my first startup failed. The lessons I got from that failure were invaluable to the next one succeeding. Right now, if you continue to fail over and over and over, that's a different problem. Mm-hmm. But, failure is really learning. That's how we learn, right? We've kind of demonized the word to make it like a bad thing, but it's really where a lot of the growth happens and where you get to. Well, if you're in student loan debt, you don't get to play the entrepreneur. You're not going to get the benefits of being an owner in the company because you can't put up when it's time to put up money, right? Because you don't have any. And so now you're not an owner and now you're not seeing the benefits. So even the company does well and you just have an employee salary because you could never take that risk. And you could never then get yourself out of this nihilistic mentality where you really are out of the hole. And so then it makes sense. Well, why not? What do I got left? I'll just gamble. Mm-hmm. So I understand that. And I think this is the seed of that. And this and the seed of the seed is the government being in charge of all of it. And going, yeah, we'll give everybody financial aid that will trap them for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And so if this helps anybody not go down that path, then to me, it's a success.
Mm-hmm. So Dave, let's say, somebody still makes that decision to go to some type of higher education. What are some of the hacks and some of the important things to be able to remember to be able to ease that burden?
So the first one is, and this does not go over well with parents or students because they're kind of both ready for a break at 18. Anyone who's dealt with teenagers knows this, but it's live at home. So live at home is half the cost. So if you can live at home and go to school, that's half the cost of college right there. Mm-hmm. So you can save that. Then obviously scholarships help a ton. But also having jobs that will reimburse tuition. There's more and more companies that do this because they're trying to maintain employees. In fact, Starbucks will pay for everything for you to go to Arizona State University online. I believe that's still true to this day. Wow. So if you work at Starbucks, and again, for the business, it makes sense because they retain employees. But one of the things that most people don't understand is the math behind this. So an employer pays your tuition reimbursement. and they can pay up to roughly $5,000 per year. That's not the same as you making $5,000 a year. If you've got to make that money afterwards, then you've got to pay taxes, right? And so it's basically worth double by the time you get down and set it. The easy math is that's worth double. So if you can get an employer to pay $5,000 a year in your tuition, that's $10,000 a year. Plus you have a job. So now you can pay some tuition as well. And again, a lot of students don't want to have a job, right? I just want to focus on being in school. But here's the other part that I will tell everyone, that there is a huge value in having the job, especially the job that you don't really want on the long term while you're in college. Like if you work at UPS, you're going to move a lot of boxes. It's going to be physically demanding. That's really motivation to go to class. I worked on a farm during the summer when I was in college, and that was motivation. Every time I woke up and I was like, I don't really want to go to class today, I would think of the farmer down the street who I would see every morning walking in. And this guy would wake up at, dusk to dawn. This guy was, all the time there was light, this guy was working. And he was hunched over, and the guy was like in his 50s, looked like he was in his 80s. And all I could think was, this is hard, and I don't want to be that guy. So I'm going to keep going to class when I don't want to. And it's just a real lesson in terms of like, you go and work and do something hard. It's the incentive and the motivation of, I don't want to do this my entire life. Mm-hmm. And then the other lessons that you get from being in organizations and working are a lot of the skills they can't teach you in college. One of the examples I always give is, okay, you went to college, you got the degree, so you're the boss, they put you as manager. When do you fire somebody? When someone's not fitting in on your team, when do you let them go? Mm-hmm. And you can have the theoretical discussion about that in college, but you can't have the experiences of what happens when they don't let them go. What happens to the team after that happens, right? And what happens when you have a good manager who gets rid of somebody quickly, right? And it might seem, a lot of times it seems like harsh when you get rid of somebody quickly who's not fitting in on your team, but it's better for both parties, right? It's better for the team because they get rid of a member that's not working out. And it's better for that person because you're not fitting in here. So why spend more time spinning your wheels not fitting in when you can go find somewhere where you actually do fit in? Mm-hmm. But that's not a skill set they're going to teach you in college. But if you go work at a company go work at a Starbucks where you've got a bunch of employees, there's going to be some employees come through there that don't hold their weight and don't get work done. And everyone's going to bitch the manager of like, when are you going to get rid of this person? Right. And if they let them hang on long enough, then it'll just reduce the amount of work that everybody does. Mm-hmm. Right. Everyone will go to the lowest common denominator. Well, if they get away with being lazy, then I'll be lazy. They don't have to do anything. I won't do anything. They call in sick. I'll call in sick. And so the life lessons that you get from working through college are also very valuable. And I would tell you this, as an employer, if you come to me as a college graduate and you apply with me and you say, hey, during college, I worked my way through. I don't have any student loan debt because I worked through college. I had jobs all the way through college. As an entrepreneur, I know that the skill set that you have versus somebody whose parents just paid for them and never had a job in college, those are two different skill sets at that point in time. And I would much rather have the person who worked their way through school, who lived at home because they didn't want to end up with the student loan debt, right? Now, and then there's the other side of that where if the family can afford it, do they just pay it? And you go, or you could have the family money after. But those are the main hacks. The live at home is the biggest one. Community college is another one. In fact, I was just at a friend in California and she said, the California system's been really good for us. The first 2 years of community college are free in California. And then she said, our son was able to get a lot of scholarships and other money to pay for tuition. And so I go, well, what's the real then cost? Oh, room and board. And if you know about California, room and board is not cheap in California. Mm-hmm. So the room and board part alone was going to be $80,000 to $100,000 for him to live on his own. And so instead, he lived the first 2 years at home, and the second 2 years he moved in with his aunt. And that allowed him to get through college with very little, maybe even no debt at all. So, find people to live with, Keep those costs way down. Community college is great. I mean, here's the thing, Tom. If I tell you that it counts the same, whether you pay $1,000 or $10,000, but those credits are going to count the same, then why pay the $10,000?
Mm-hmm.
And that's your community college versus university, the first 2 years. And especially when you're doing all these general ed credits. There's a couple other good hacks of like when you're in high school, if you know this is your path and you want to go to college, a lot of high schools, you can go take community college credit hours that count for your high school diploma and also count for college as well. That's a good way to get a head start. Some of the kids take the AP classes. The AP stuff has gotten, some schools will take it, some not for credits. But for everybody, it's just get through as cheap as you can and get the piece of paper, and because the learning really begins then. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson we can all pass along. Everyone who's been to college or not, it's learning doesn't end when you get your degree. It's not like diploma day, you move the tassel from the left to the right or vice versa, whichever way it is. And you go, okay, I now know, right? It's like, this is the beginning of learning. Like you're just at the start of it.
Yeah, I think that this book is full of very, very informative pieces, very important things to consider. And then on the other side of it, helping people understand exactly what they want out of an education and what that ends up looking like to them instead of going into it blindly. And Dave, I appreciate you spending the time today to really pull all of this together, have a discussion about it, and the fact that you wrote a book about it. I think that can be very helpful to a lot of students and families that have a very important decision to make that really affects a giant portion of their future.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you having me on and helping spread this message, because again, if it gets out there and helps some families make better decisions and helps a few more students stay out of debt, maybe we end up with a little less nihilism and a few more entrepreneurs and a lot more happier students who haven't taken on the debt.
Mm-hmm. Of course, again, the name of the book is No Second Chances, A Family Guide to College Decision and the Lasting Impact of Debt. And it's available on Amazon and Kindle as of right now, right, Dave?
That's correct. It'll be released on July 7th on Amazon and on Kindle. And I have one last sort of request to everybody. I mean, I know your audience is a financially savvy audience. And I think that all of us with a financial education have a bit of a responsibility to help those who don't. And so here's my ask. I made it available on Kindle for $2.99. So the next time you go do your Amazon Prime order, delay your shipping a little bit, get your $3 credit, go buy it on Kindle and give it to somebody who needs it and have that discussion with them.
Absolutely. I think that's a great piece of advice to, help people. And again, just really kind of pull back the curtain on another one of these systems that is so broken and perverse because of this unfortunate evolution of our incentive systems that control all of these systems.
Yeah. It's just unfortunate that it's come to this, but it really is up to the families to make the best decisions for themselves at this point, because the systems really are not set up for them at this point.
Yeah. And like you say, you made it cheap and available so that people can have this information.
Absolutely.
And I believe you also have a couple essays and stuff like that on this on your website, right, Dave?
That's correct. Yeah, I have an old podcast that I did a few years back, and that includes blogs and other things about this. And we'll put some stuff on the book up. There'll be a page for the book as well. That site is keepyours.org, with the idea of keep a little bit of your own money instead of giving it all back to these institutions and banks that tend to collect it all.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Dave, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
This podcast is for general informational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be taken as investment advice. Guests on this show are not compensated for their appearance. Listeners are urged to educate themselves and make their own decisions. Do not base any investment decisions on the information contained. To view our full disclaimer, please visit our website.